Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu and I'm back with another Digimon video. So today I'm going to be talking about one of the new up-and-coming event series that Bandai seems to want to try to run, which is going to be Regulation Battle, and talk about what it is and its overall potential. So what is Regulation Battle? So Regulation Battles are store events which follow alternative rule sets. So upon entering, you're going to be getting your usual stuff, which is a participation prize fighting for the winner's card. And we don't know if going forward that Bandai is going to constantly change the rule set for each volume, just like they used to do with Ultimate Cups. But even if they do, the whole idea is just for them to have an alternative way to spice up the game and be able to have us play the game slightly differently, taking a break from the usual competitive sweaty Digimon. So Volume 1, more specifically, is going to be a low rarity format. So they labeled it as common and uncommon limited battles. So this means that the decks that you're going to be building and playing are going to contain only cards of the common and uncommon rarity. So any promos are not able to be used, as well as any other high rarity cards. Then when it comes to alternative arts, yes, you still can use the alternative arts of the legal cards used, so any common or uncommon that has an alt art, by all means, feel free to include into your decks to bling them out. Then the last big thing is this rule applies to all card types, so it doesn't necessarily matter if it's a Tamer, Egg, or Digimon, it's all going to have to be commons and uncommons. And then they didn't exactly label if this event is going to follow the current ban and restriction list or any future ban and restriction list, so I would just assume that they are, just because those cards are on that list for a very specific reason, because those cards are incredibly strong and needed to be curved for the game to be in a healthier state overall. So it just makes sense in a lower powered format to also want to enforce those rules. So when it comes to a couple of examples of what is going to be legal versus what isn't, this is just the examples that Bandai gave us. But when it comes to the pricing, as far as why we're playing this format to begin with, or this event, we're going to be playing for alt art cards. So just for participating, we're going to get this absolutely gorgeous cherry blossom framed Biyomon from EX6, which is a pretty decent card. It's not the most meta card, but it's not a bad card nonetheless. And the winner card that we're going to be fighting for is going to be a cherry blossom bordered alt art version of the EX5 Edamon, which is actually a pretty strong card and does still see some play. Then stores also, just like in any event, could run with additional pricing if they really want to. That's just purely based on what the store and how they usually run their events and what they want to do to further support the game. So when does this event actually take place? They just recently announced it in late February, and it's not actually going to start running until April 30th and last through May 31st. So you have about a month to be able to play in this event, so the stores might be running one event for it, they might be running multiple, or if you have multiple stores, they could taper them off. It really just depends on your area and what you have access to when it comes to local in-store play. But one thing we do have to keep in mind as of the recording of this video in early March, we know that it's going to actually include BT21 and the new starter decks based on the adventure trait. So assuming there is not going to be any delays, that's going to increase the amount of cards that's going to be playable for this event, which is going to be pretty cool to see what new tech and tools we can incorporate for this event, especially compared to when Japan ran it. So we do have to note that BT21 is slated to come out on April 25th, again, assuming there's not going to be any delays. So we do have to keep in mind that Digimon usually is a game that, based on its core mechanics, rules, and how the cards are designed, is actually very not friendly towards alternative formats. Bandai's tried in the past and nothing's really stuck, as well as fans have tried in the past and again, still nothing is really stuck. just because how the game has been managed isn't necessarily very receptive towards alternative formats. But that's not saying alternative formats can't exist, and I do think it is important for games to have the ability to have alternative formats, so I do at least appreciate the effort, even if most likely Bandai is just going to run it for this type of event, drop it, and then we're going to move on to the next one, which doesn't necessarily feel good or support other styles of play. So if they kept things a little bit more consistent, and if they changed how they actually design their cards to better support alternative formats, maybe we actually could have a secondary format that is pretty decent emerge. But for now, this is just what we're going to be working with based on the information that we know, and I just wanted to highlight that there is going to be some imbalances because of how Digimon is ran and how its core rules work. So when it comes to this event, the big thing that's on everyone's mind is, oh my god, what am I actually going to play? Well, luckily for us, as I kind of already alluded to, Japan already had this event. They had this event in their BT18 format, so we could actually use their data as a springboard for actually figuring out what we would want to play with, or what is actually possible that had some success over in Japan. So when it comes to each of the different colors, I kind of broke down what kind of decks that they were using. I'm not going to be showing or giving any decks. I want you to come up with them yourself, but this is just the idea to be able to get the gears turning as far as what's possible in terms of what you could build. So when it comes to yellow decks, we do have Puppets and Garomon that was seeing play in Japan. Purple uses dark animals and undead, as well as purple good stuff with the discard mechanic, on top of purple SOCs or Sons of Chaos, and even a purple Guilmon mill deck is still possible to play. When it comes to red dinosaurs and reptiles seem to do pretty well over in Japan, as well as when it comes to blue, hybrids and aquatic kind of fit together in its own little mold, just because they do have lots of cross synergy and support, so that's pretty interesting to note there. You could even just take the deck into both of those directions a little bit more hardcore, but they decided that it's a good idea to combine both of them. Then, when it comes to green and talking about combining things, you have Terriermon, Lopmon, and the Beastkin trait that's seen some play over in Japan, as well as the ever so classic Plants and Fairies. Then, when it comes to black as a color, the most popular archetype or trait that seen semblance of success, and it was ran in a couple of different ways, was black machines and cyborgs. So we already know that we're going to be getting more machines and cyborgs, so that just increases the possibilities that we have for what we could possibly play with these traits. Then when it came to mixed color decks, they had a couple of different armor form decks. You also had Numemon, you also had Sukamon and Edamon, Hunters, and Security Control all pop up over in Japan and do some semblance of success. If anyone's actually wondering what the best deck for this event was over in Japan, that was very easily the Dark Animals and Undead deck. So if you just want to build towards one of the most, if not the most powerful thing based on the Japanese format, there you go. Feel free to start experimenting and building off of these. But as I kind of already mentioned, we have more cards to work with than Japan did. So Japan stopped at BT18 because that's when their event was running, and we have BT19, EX8, BT20, and BT21 on top of 2 new starter decks. So that's a lot of extra cards added to the pool of cards to be able to make more decks that are possible to play than over in Japan. So when it comes to just some of the highlights, because there's probably more than what I'm currently thinking of, we have Purple Ghosts, Excel, Pulsemon, Black Chronicles or X-Antibody, Crosshearts, Blue Gowan Fish, as just a couple of possibilities based on the cards that we do know, and as of the recording of this video, I'm pretty sure that an Adventures deck is going to be possible to build because that's what the starter decks are going to be based around, as well as a good chunk of BT21. So it'll be interesting to see what other decks are possible inside of BT21, but as of the recording, we don't necessarily have that full set spoiled because it's not coming out for quite a while. But this is just a good starting point in terms of getting some base level ideas as far as what's possible to play for this type of event. So when it comes to deck building and kind of figuring out what you're going to be playing, we have a couple of things to keep in mind in order to have some success in terms of finding a good idea or deck to be able to work towards. So the two big things I like to keep in mind is either keep things as generic as possible or keep things as archetypical as possible. And what I mean by archetypical is you want to try to stay in your lane as much as possible and use cards that are going to be synergizing with the archetype or trait, or I guess name, of your choice. Or, like I said, the inverse is just make things as generic as possible and run nothing that's really synergizing with anything, but just having a good pile of very strong effects for their rarity. So you're going to want to make sure to research the pool of cards that you're going to have legal. More specifically, I would start with what your win con is. Most of the time that's going to be the level 6 and kind of just work backwards from there, because you have to know how you're going to be winning the game to decide how you're actually going to be getting there. And when you decide like, hey, this level 6 look really good, but unfortunately I don't have any level 4s or 5s or even 3s to be able to make it work, then you're going to have to go back and start at the level 6 stage. So that's kind of just a little basic idea on how you would end up researching what deck you can possibly play. So the next card that I would probably research outside of obviously your win con is going to be your tamers, because again, a lot of tamers in the game are going to be rare and above, so that doesn't leave us with a lot of low rarity tamers, but tamers do have a pretty profound impact on the game in terms of the value that they can offer. So making sure that you have access at some really good tamers is obviously going to put you at a bigger advantage than decks that don't have access at some specific tamers that are going to help propel what the game plan is. So that's kind of why you want to see what archetypes are going to be supported, so that way you could just try to play towards those as much as possible. Or as I mentioned before, if you're not playing towards an archetype, you're going to want to keep things as generic as possible and try to limit yourself for a very specific mechanic, so that way you could have as much cohesion in your deck as possible. So you're going to want to take a look at all of the other generic cards outside of what is possible for your deck, so that way you could try to add in some extra tech or spice to pad things out, especially if your archetype doesn't have its full level of support. But enough of me yapping. I want to know what you think about these alternative formats. I think that it's really nice for them to try to attempt to find an alternative format for the game, but because the game is so resistant towards the alternative formats, and Bandai usually doesn't stick with that one idea and keep running with it and designing the game to actually support alternative formats, that's why I don't necessarily have a whole lot of faith in it, but I do think it's nice of an idea to have kind of a different take or spin on being able to play the game. After playing the main competitive format for so long, it could be a little bit frustrating and boring for some, depending on the format that we're in. So it's nice to see that they're at least trying to alleviate that and spice things up a little bit. But tell me your thoughts about this event down in the comments below, and while you're down there, you might as well leave a like and subscribe if you enjoy this type of content and want to see more, and don't forget to hit that notification bell so you can stay up to date for when I go live next. And with that, I hope to see everyone in the next video.